Hey guys, Paul here. So today I wanted to talk about a change in Yu-Gi-Oh card design over the last few years that I've noticed, and it kind of relates to power creep and the way that effects sort of work around game mechanics. I want to get people's opinions on this because I think it's sort of an interesting thing. So basically, it's not about like, oh, archetypes these days are just better or stronger or whatever. Sure, that's true, but it's more about how Yu-Gi-Oh card effects seem to be almost designed to cheat or skip around game mechanics more and more often, or perhaps skip counterplay things. So basically, let's just start with an example, right? Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring is pretty much a staple in Yu-Gi-Oh right now because it stops decks from searching or summoning from deck or sending from deck. Basically, it stops most decks' starter cards or really key crucial plays. That's been the case since it released. But something that I've noticed now is that a lot more decks are sort of circumventing Ash Blossom by placing the card onto the field, for instance. So you might take maybe Diabell Star, right? When it's special summoned, it lets you set one of your Snake Eyes spells and traps directly from your deck. It doesn't actually add it to your hand or send it to the grave or anything like that. It just directly sets it from the deck, which means that you can't use Ash Blossom against it. And this is something that I really think is a little bit cool and a little bit troubling. It's cool because, yay, there's counterplay now to a really common, annoying kind of counterplay card in Ash Blossom. Well, now my deck doesn't have to worry about it because I'm just able to place this card face up on the field, and now this can't be Ash. And there's a lot of different archetypes that do this. Diabell Star is just probably the most notorious example right now. But yeah, so this is interesting to me because it's like, man, if that's the case, then what's like Ash Blossom for? And maybe there's better examples than just that one. So one of the ones that I think is, and this has been around for a while, this isn't like a super new development, but cards that send from field to grave rather than destroying cards. So destroying cards would be like Raigeki or, Dark Hole, Smashing Ground, I don't know, just Mirror Force, cards that just destroy a monster on the field, right? But there are also a lot of cards, like let's take maybe Dengursu, for instance, that instead of destroying the card, it just sends the card to the graveyard. And, for all intents and purposes, it's the same thing, but the reason why that we're having the whole like send the card thing is just to get around cards that can't be destroyed by card effects. So if a card says, oh, this can't be destroyed by card effects, well, it's fine. This didn't destroy it, it sent it to the graveyard. And again, it like kind of makes me mix because it's like it's cool because you can get around like, a troublesome boss monster, but then it's like, well, then what's the benefit of having, destruction protection if a lot of cards just send the card away? And the same sort of goes for targeting, which this has always been one of the most annoying things when it comes to like teaching people Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it's like a ruling that will come up super duper often is cards that just don't target. Cards like say Mirror Jade that it just when the effect resolved, it just sends a monster, or sorry, banishes a monster. And it's like weird because it's like, man, the cards literally make you still have to pick what's going to get banished when you use like Mirror Jade's effect or, DPE, that might be like a good one, or like any of those effects, right? That don't target and just sort of send a thing to graveyard. It's odd. Like, I'm not really sure what well, actually, I'm not exactly sure what they're doing. The idea is that it gets around cards that say this card cannot be targeted. And there's also the benefit of like if it doesn't target, then it's harder for your opponent to kind of like know what to chain or how to respond to it because they don't actually know like exactly which of your cards that you're gonna like get sent. And so that's the whole thing. And like it's cool because there's maybe an extra layer of depth, but then it's annoying because it's like, well, what's the point of targeting protection? And also it kind of undermines the idea of cards that target when they're activated versus I guess cards that just kind of get to not and are strictly better for it. Like in almost all cases, you just want your card to not target. Like it makes targeting, which is just a game mechanic, be actually a weakness. Like I've seen new cards and like people will be like, wow, the fact that this doesn't target's really good. But there are also cards where it's like this targets, which means like it can't be used against this common threat, this common threat, this common thing. Like Lady Labyrinth can't be targeted or something like that. And it's just kind of like, So that's a little bit of like a weird just circumventing the rules just for the sake of a card being better. I also have some other notes here. I'm just reading from them. Yeah. So, now the biggest one probably has been to me like the progression from graveyard to banish zone to banish face down. And even maybe you could argue there's more from there. So like, for instance, back in the day, old cards would go to the graveyard, and that generally meant you couldn't like super easily access cards anymore. There were things like Monster Reborn and Call the Haunted, and they were kind of special because they let you summon a monster from the graveyard, which typically you wouldn't be able to do because it's in the graveyard. It's like it's dead, it's gone, right? And obviously, over time, we have moved further and further away from that. There are plenty of cards that can recycle stuff from grave. There are plenty of monsters that have effects in the grave. And, in a lot of people's estimation, the graveyard can function as a second hand depending on like the deck that we're talking about. In fact, I'd say most modern decks can totally access their grave when they need to. If it's like part of an archetype strategy, Konami will kind of program that in, right? But when the graveyard became so accessible, we had to have another way of really getting rid of cards, and that's sort of where Banished comes in. So if a card's banished, it's like out of the graveyard. You can't bring it back with Monster Reborn or the Warrior Returning Alive or something. It's like banished. It's gone. Being banished should suggest like, okay, you're not coming back. But then, time passes and we actually have a lot of cards that A, get effects when they're banished, B, can recover banished cards, and C, sometimes like grave, banished, and field are all the same thing for the sake of a lot of fusion effects. Like take what is the Jesus Christ, Libellion, right? Like where it just fusion summons using cards that are on your field, your graveyard, or your banished zone. And it's just like, oh, okay, well, I guess banished doesn't actually mean anything. If I'm getting effects when the cards are banished, and there's a like million and one ways to get the banished cards back, then I guess like banished doesn't actually mean it's really gone. Okay, fine. So now we make Banished Facedown, which has so far been pretty effective. You can't really easily access Banished Facedown cards. Though as time goes on, we're slowly creeping our way there. There's a few more cards that can like, touch a face down banished card, right? Like that's where I think of Kashtira Rise Heart, which is banned now, but will one day be back. And, Cyframe Lord Omega. There are a few ways to interact with a face down banished card. There are even some instances where I think it's kind of cool, like how the Gizmek archetype can recover those face down banished cards, but they do have to fit still a certain like criteria. Now it actually feels like though we've even managed to, I don't want to say power creep that, but like we have found out that putting monsters they like in the spell and trap zone, which is like what the Snake Eye deck's kind of trying to do with like Flamberg and stuff. You can force monsters into the back row, and that's actually the best way of removing cards because it completely deprives your opponent of access to those cards in almost every situation. It's sometimes easier to get back a face down banished card than it is to get back a card that like Flamberg put in your back row, like a monster. And so it's just sort of like, I sometimes I think it's cool because there is a lot more depth that these things introduce. There are more ways to out cards. If something can't be targeted, then there's effects that don't target. If something can't be destroyed by card effects, well, there's effects that send. Would I prefer if it was maybe like, oh, if it can't be destroyed, then you could like banish it or bounce it, things that have been in the game a lot longer? Sure. But maybe that's just me being like, stuck in the past. Like, these are cool things. They're new mechanics that sort of let you interact with your opponent in different ways and deal with boards in different ways. So why am I complaining so much, right? And that is true. Like, I think that there are decks that I play where I love the fact that I have like non-targeting removal, right? Or the fact that I can kind of get rid of cards in a way that is not exactly easy for my opponent to respond to. But sometimes it's like, man, it sort of undermines a bit of the rules, particularly when it's around cards that are, you can just tell that they did this so that the card would be better. There's one other thing that happens a lot too is like with cards that need to be discarded to get their effects versus like send a card from hand to grave. So if a card's like sent from hand to grave, then it's not discarded, which means it won't get an effect if it needed to get an effect from being discarded. It's like, it's really weird and it can kind of feel pedantic. It's one of those things that, like I was saying before, kind of makes teaching a little bit complicated because it's like, oh, no, it doesn't target, you just pick the card, right? It doesn't destroy it, it just got sent to grave, so it doesn't get the effect it would get when it's destroyed. Get it? And I know, all of us that have played Yu-Gi-Oh! For a million years, this is nothing new. We get it, we kind of know the difference. It just doesn't seem like a huge deal. But I do sometimes think that this is some of the stuff that can make Yu-Gi-Oh! Feel a little bit bloated and a little bit, overcomplicated, and also does sort of function to let Konami power creep things in a sort of more a sneakier way a little bit, right? Like that's part of why Kashtira Fenrir is a little bit better than Dynarest or Pankratops, is because it banishes a threat face down, right? Instead of just destroying it. And so at least it still targets, thank goodness. But like Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of crazy. There's other elements of power creep and stuff at play at Yu-Gi-Oh, but this is one of the ones that I kind of wanted to highlight because I feel like it's sort of a subversion of game mechanics in favor of just letting you play around things. So, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? That's actually what I want you guys to let me know because I'm sort of mixed on it. I think it would be easy for me to sit up here and say, oh, great, just one more bad thing about Yu Gi Oh! But like, I play decks that do these exact same things. I play Exo Sisters, they have Magnifica, she does not target with her banishing effect. I play Vanquish Soul, they don't target with like Caesar Valius, or when I'm using Rosin's effect to like destroy everything in the column. And that's really helpful, like, right? Like, that adds depth. So I don't want to see this as like an objectively bad thing, but I do want to hear people's opinions on it and maybe how much further you guys think it can go. Like, what's the next kind of level of this? Like, it feels like putting monsters in, the face up spell and trap zone is an evolution of banished face down. Is there like another step from there? Is there another step of ways that we can avoid hand traps and ways that we can avoid, stuff that doesn't target and, whatever? Like, I've sort of seen this trend of cards that are unaffected by things that don't target them, like the Horus, King Sarcophagus gets that protection, or Underworld Goddess actually can't be destroyed by effects unless they target her. So I guess there's like sort of something there. I don't know. It's an interesting topic and one that I want to hear people's opinions on. So without further ado, let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Fast turn.